Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. I have someone really special with me, Miss Manjeet Kripalani, who's an author and also the co-founder of the Gateway House, the Indian Council of Global Relations. Who does it? These guys do a lot of work, guys. So please check out the website, check out what they do. It's very, very interesting. Namaskar, madam. Thank you so much for
Namaskar.
coming in. And nice to have you. Pleasure to have you on the platform. I heard a
Very,
I read a couple of your articles. I read a couple of what you've written. It's very, very interesting. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see the overall global scenario today? Because it's very polarized. It's very tensed up. There are wars. If you look at the previous 10 years, it was rather they were wars, but not existential wars. They were not wars that could literally end the world, sort of a thing. How do you analyze the globe today? And then we'll kind of build on the conversation.
so I would say the world is in a, in a in a deep transformation, and the reason it's this way is because we don't. You're right. There are some wars, but there's no great world war. But there
Mm,
is a world war in a sense because since the Second World War, there really hasn't been a big transformational edifice that has been set up for the world. The old transformational edifice from 1945 is now collapsing. It had a
mm,
sell by date and it was still being sold. It wasn't updated, it wasn't corrected, it wasn't included. And so, countries that have outgrown those rules are now wanting to participate in a world which they feel is more equal and which accommodates them. The powers that created the world wars and which are the victors of the world wars also do not want these countries to enter. They do not want an equal world. And so there is a tug of war going on. Consequently, the victors of the last wars are now creating new wars, thinking that they can replicate the victories of the past. That era has come to an end. And so we have a world that is in deep transformation, and it is accompanied by a technological transformation that isn't just guns. It is actually technology, social media, the internet, and this is all coming together to empower people who were not previously empowered. So the voices are now everywhere. There isn't an
mm,
authoritative voice. The media is no longer able to cope with being an authoritative voice because their model has changed and they are no longer able to make a profit from telling people how the world looks. Because people now themselves are able to assess how the world looks, they are making the decisions. And so, in this highly democratized world and highly democratized technology, we are seeing a massive transformation. Those that are trying to stop this transformation to make sure that they stay on top are either initiating wars, which, as you said rightly, which is existential wars, and certainly the war of Russia and Ukraine is one of them. That's a proxy war. The Israel Palestine war is one of them. The Saudi Houthi war is one of them. The the cold hot war between China and Taiwan is one of them. The abandonment of Afghanistan is one of them. The creation of the problems of Afghanistan is one of them. The collapse of Pakistan is one of them. What we are seeing in Latin America is among them. Um, so there are lots of things going on, but there is also the rise of new players that didn't exist before. So there was just the
mm,
United States, and then you had Europe, right? And then you had Australia, Japan, the collective West, which is now being called the collective West. But the United States, through the war, the proxy war on Ukraine, has ensured that Europe will never rise. Right? The euro was starting to become really important, and even when countries held foreign exchange, they held dollars. They also held some euros. They had pounds, euros, and some yen. There is no way people are going to hold euros now, and that has
mm.
declined. They're they're not holding yuan. That's very little growth in the yuan, but they're certainly starting to trade in yuan. So financially, that's a way of looking at the transformations. There is also now the rise of Russia again, thanks to the Ukraine war. They were not able to. The collapse of the Soviet Union had kind of made Russia just another country, and Russia was looking, as you know, Europewards. It was a cousin of the
Mm,
West. And unfortunately, the West has, the United States has torn the cousins away from each other. It's torn Europe away from Russia. And so, unfortunately, Europe is unable to see its own interest. And so it has allowed this to happen. So now you have Russia, you had China already on the rise, and now you have India, which is emerging. It's not quite positioning itself anyway, either way, one way or the other, because we're not at that development stage where we can say,
Correct.
okay, we're a rich country and we can take sides. We're not taking sides, but we are holding on to where we are. So simply by being an anchor with 1.4 billion people and not moving one way or the other, we're kind of keeping the world balanced. We're the anchor in
Mhm.
the world. And we
Yeah.
should understand that very well.
As I think a lot of people have said this, whose side is India on? Well, India's on India's side.
That's right.
I wonder you whose side are you guys on? So it's quite interesting.
Yes.
You mentioned about Europe, and Europe is an interesting case study for a country that, and I'm going to might be a little harsh, pardon me for that, but sold its sovereignty and sold its crown jewels to the Americans, and we see that happening in Australia today. We see that happening in Japan. These are three examples in the world where they signed on the dotted line, if I may, which is what is being asked of India to do as well, alliance and this and that and the other. How do you see India's strategic autonomy going forward? Because it's kind of one of the, I think, the two most hated words in the American foreign policy establishment.
Yes, I think India is doing a pretty good job of hanging on to itself. And we are learning how to play all sides, but most importantly, I think we are finally learning how to play to our own interests.
Hmm.
So, um, India understands that the technology comes from the United States. The United States is using India for a counter against China, but
Yeah.
also there's a large Indian population in the US, which is extremely successful
Hmm.
and which is also extremely loyal to America. And so that is important. And also, don't forget that through our technology, our software, and the back office, Indian companies are plugged into the guts of corporate America and corporate Europe. And the trust factor is so high that this is never even questioned. Actually, India could help to fix a lot of American problems because we know in their insides where the bodies are buried. For instance, Indian software companies are they are the back office for insurance companies. They're the back office for healthcare companies. They're the back office for manufacturing companies. They're the back office for financial companies, and they know, for instance, in the healthcare system, what the insurance companies do and what the healthcare companies do
Oh,
and what consumers want. We could actually put that together, but we're not in a position to offer a deal to the US, and neither is the US in the mood to take a deal from India, especially in technology. So we're actually in a very good place. We're trusted. We're also trusted by our old friends, Russia. They understand, and it's been surprising through the US conflict, the Ukraine conflict, that the Europeans, the Russians, the US all say, we understand where India is coming from. You need to develop. And they are smart enough to give us the space to develop because we're not really taking sides. And
hmm.
we're still providing them the services they need in order to keep their economies humming because we're still low cost providers of these services. So I think we're walking a very fine line, and we are able to manage that. Most importantly, in Asia and in West Asia in particular,
Hmm.
we are West Asia. We've managed really our politics and
Yeah.
geopolitics quite well. We're friends. We have not done so well with East Asia. I mean, I don't mean Japan, but I mean, say, Southeast Asia. We're not yet really fully
It's
involved with
yeah,
ASEAN.
it's kind
Yeah.
of happening now. Hmm.
Yes, it exactly. So Jaishankar's visit to ASEAN this time, I think, was more meaningful
Yeah.
than previously, and so we need to start cultivating engagements with Southeast Asia. And the big country there is, of course, Indonesia, and
Hmm.
it's Thailand. And so, in fact, Gateway House, we are planning, lots of engagement with these two countries, so that we can bring forward our ideas. There's many things that will work with these Southeast Asian countries and us, particularly with our financial inclusion, which is the India stack, etc. And so we really need to get these to work. One way to do it is obviously through just outright agreements, but one important way to do it is through our aid architecture, which we
Mm,
now call development assistance. But the development assistance is so out of date
yeah,
that it needs to be upgraded in
yeah.
order to offer countries what they see as very, very contemporary and equal and also affordable
Mm.
technology, right? Because their only options are the US private sector companies and the Chinese companies, neither of which are going to respect their sovereignty.
That's the most important thing. And you know what Prime Minister Modi keeps talking about is creating of a knowledge bank, and that's what he kind of mentioned during the Global South Summit as well. Uh, I'm actually looking forward for the version two of the Global South, where they they had mentioned that either they will be coming here or they'll do some sort of a online summit with 135 countries. So it's that's going to be really impactful. Really agree. And as far as Southeast Asia, I kind of draw it a little further into the Marshalls and the uh,
The island Pacific, the island
Micronesia.
nation.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
And
yes,
Jaishankar ji put a very interesting name. He said large large ocean island nations or
yes,
something like that.
yes,
He coined a new term. So that actually said, yeah, you might be a small nation as far as the island is concerned, but you have a large area in the ocean.
yes, that's right.
Agreed, absolutely.
And they
Ma'am,
play a
when you
very important role. Sorry, they play a very important role as what is now come to be known as the blue economy. And
yeah,
they can be extremely knowledgeable and helpful. They are receptacles of knowledge on
mm,
how the
mm.
oceans work. And so we should, like you say about knowledge, I mean, this should be the exchange that should be happening, not weapons and that sort of thing.
No,
So India
that
has to
that
play that role.
this also has to come, absolutely.
Yes,
Um, Ma'am, when we look at what happened from the West this time during the elections, we knew there would be some interference and stuff like that, but certain things kind of went a little off track. And if you hear Dr. Jaishankar speaking in Tokyo when during the Quad summit, he actually said, and he looked at, funnily, he looked at Anthony Blinken when he said that we were very disturbed by what happened, and everybody kind of tried to teach us democracy, which is not fair. Um, an Indian leader coming out and saying something like that on a world public forum is quite special. How do you see India taking this particular thing forward? Because at the end of it, what I'm hearing is that there is a certain amount of untrustworthiness which is emerging between the thought leaders of India US relations. Today, everybody's saying, yeah, we don't trust them. They do this, all sorts of these nonsensical things. We don't trust them anymore. Or we have to be careful. You know, in Hindi, mein, there is a saying, na, doodh ka jhala, chaach bhi pook pook ke peeta hai.
yes.
So, how do you see this getting balanced out in the future if it is getting balanced out?
Well, the only way this is going to, the US has acquired many habits, many good ones, and also many bad ones. And one of those bad ones is just getting rid of the guy you don't like. So we have to be careful to always be the girl they like. Right? It's
Hmm.
a, it's a, it's a way to keep
Yeah, it's
ourselves
interesting.
kind of safe. But uh, the US is not going to change because these have now become embedded habits. So
Yeah.
it will only change from the inside. And you can see the US is now changing from the inside. There are people from within the US, this is Donald Trump's constituency, which is now finding a louder voice because they've had
Mm,
the Democratic administration for the last 5 years, and actually, the unfortunate past, I fully expected actually when Biden came to power, I fully expected people like Hillary Clinton, etc., to reach out to Donald Trump's constituency and say, "My dear fellow citizens, I'm so sorry that you felt neglected. What can we do for you? How can we help you?" Um, Instead of which the divide got even worse and widened. And because they've started to use, critical race theory, which has really no place in 2024,
yeah.
things are being brought back. So it seems that the deep state of the US or the old elite are clinging to what they used to be expert at, and that was one is the Cold War, and
Hmm.
Russia experts were lying dormant with nothing to do because the China experts had taken over, and the second is really racism, which the U.S. has progressed so much in terms of race and affirmative action, and really in that sense they were quite a good model for us. They seems
Yeah,
to have just gone back, and
regressed.
it
Hmm.
isn't it regressed, and it isn't necessarily the black people who are doing it. It's just that whoever wants to get away with whatever they can, it's human nature. And so I'm sorry that they did not address this issue, and so Donald Trump's constituency is now seems to be stronger than ever. And after the assassination attempt, certainly he looks like he has a wider base. I'm not sure whether what is happening in other parts of the world is also going to happen to the US. Is the silent voter? The silent voter is a phenomena. We saw it in India in 2014, right? We also saw it in 2019. We also saw it in 2024, but it was for the other side.
Yeah.
And so the silent voter has become a very important player in democracies. They're not going to tell you what they think, and they're very smart about their choices. And so I think we're going to see that phenomena in the US. We won't know who's going to win until the actual election results really do come out. And if the US is known to interfere in other countries' elections, they are certainly going to interfere in their own elections. So it's going to be fun to watch.
Oh yeah, I mean I love Hillary Clinton for that, for only one dialogue that she said. If you grow snakes in your backyard, they're going to bite you. So if you, I've twisted it and I said, if you grow sorrows in your backyard, be careful because he's going to bite you.
Yeah, unfortunately, they have allowed people like this, and this is part of the because the Americans believe in capitalism of
Yeah.
their sort. Even that capitalism is not, as you may have read Richard Sharma's new book. It's even that is struggling. So they have to understand that the free markets don't necessarily solve all problems, and
Hmm.
we've seen that also again during COVID. Adi, the US is the one country that has no public sector. And so we were able to manage COVID quite well because we
Yeah.
had a public sector. The government could depend on certain sector. Ditto with Russia, ditto with China, ditto with Europe, even Europe, France particularly, has a public sector. And so do a lot of other countries. It is the leftover of socialism, but it's
Hmm.
not such a bad thing because with the world becoming so kind of dangerous and countries having to protect themselves against technologies and bio warfare and actual warfare drones, etc. It is very important for the state to have their own sort of companies, quasi
Hmm.
companies and agencies to be able to protect their populations. The US has none. So maybe it's time for them to start thinking about what can the state do which also makes them so vulnerable to the US private sector, which is defense companies, technology companies, right? And the US now really has only two. It has only two tools to use. One is defense companies, which are private, profitable companies, so they sell weapons to everybody. And the second is sanctions, which actually are not working because everyone has been so subject to sanctions, including India, that we are not. There's a whole world out there which has been sanctioned that is stepping away from it and created their own financial and other systems to manage without sanctions. And and China and India are very good examples of that. Iran, I mean, it survived all these years despite being sanctioned. Cuba,
Somewhere down the line, I think sanctions bring out the best in a country. So I've actually
that's it.
jokingly said, bring it on. I'd like to see US sanction India. It'll be fun because, you know, we crying for fighter aircraft. I think in 6 7 years we'll be flying F-50 or something like that, which is far ahead of the Americans. But yeah, I agree with you in principle. They kind of create that, might I say, over righteous environment for themselves to judge other people.
Yeah, they've become their own church. And it's, when politicians become their own religious leaders, it's really not. And unfortunately, this religion is the postmodern postmodern life where everyone is so secular that need they don't need the presence of God. And we've seen, I mean, most recently in China. China used to be, communism was their god. And when I was in China in 2018, we went to Tibet, and the Chinese could still say, "Oh, we don't believe in God," although they really do revere the Potala Palace. They kept saying, "Oh, we're communists. We don't believe in God." And we have to remind them that in Hinduism there is a place for people like them. That's also part of the philosophy. Well, when I was in China about 10 days ago, uh, we got a very different response post COVID, where they said that there is China has three philosophies. One is Buddhism, the philosophy. One is Taoism, and one is Confucianism. And I mean, communism controls everything if it controls the economy. But people are yearning. Everybody yearns for something to belong to, something that gives them inner joy. And also in the Olympics opening ceremony in France, you saw the ability of the West to really mock their own faith because they feel that man is so superior that you don't need a connection to the cosmos. Or maybe they're conquerors of the cosmos, and so you don't need that. And this is where religions like Islam, which are so deeply observant, feel offended. And this is where they find space to enter. One can almost see it to say that the cracks are visible. I mean, if they are so godless, maybe we can offer them something. And that's what the West kind of doesn't really understand. India is very observant. West Asia is very observant. Southeast Asia is very observant. South America is very observant. People do believe in God. It's human nature. So, also all indigenous societies believe in nature as their God. And that, I think, has been forgotten by these very postmodern societies. We have to think, they have to think more clearly about who they are. And even if their constitution and their courts say you put your hand on the Bible, they have to believe in that book.
Sorry, when you have a singularity of any sort, one book, one this, one that, it restricts your line of thought to a point, rather than going in a parallel where you're actually opening your line of thought. Yeah, they've been able to develop technology and this and that, but you see that it was like that, and now it's coming to a head where all these things are coming to a clash, and it's very interesting to watch. When you look at it's, so basically what you're trying to say, it's a clash of civilizations
No, it isn't a
in
clash
some
of
sort.
civilizations. I think it's not a clash.
It's
I think that
crudely put.
no, I don't think it's Islam versus Christianity and versus Hinduism, etc. I think that I think that very religious societies feel offended by those who are not observant because it also means that they don't respect them.
Okay.
And that is a very different take on it's not really clash of civilizations. It really is that you have to respect people's inside, right? What they feel.
Hmm.
Uh, what has happened is that because Christianity has had so many reform movements and so many interpretations, that it is able to take this, the study of religion is an academic study for them.
Hmm.
Right? And not a lot of people go to church. They convert the churches into, um, they
Bookstore.
convert it, yeah, all kinds of things. And for the observant, that is very offensive. But for them, it's okay because it's become an academic study. Still, we know when times are hard, the human being turns to, the greater power. And so there is a need for the greater power to have its place in very developed societies. And maybe we will become that sci-fi film, right? Maybe humanity will become that. But in the meanwhile, we've got the reality of religions like Islam, which have not experienced a lot of
Reform.
Reformation, a
Hmm.
lot of interpretation, etc. It is not an academic study, it is a religious study. Hinduism has long been philosophy, long been an academic study, but the invasions have kind of, you know, thrown Hinduism asunder in some ways. And so it's trying to find its way back politically. Um, but still, there is a great deal of interest with young Indians to understand their place in Hinduism. And Hinduism is very, accepting. You can come and learn about the philosophy without having to convert. But different religions offer different things. But one simply has to understand them. And every religion needs to adapt, reform, have different interpretations. Um, India has many of those. That's why people feel that Hinduism is okay to, it's so scattered. It doesn't have this. It doesn't have that. No, we do not have the Commandments. And Hinduism is really learned through osmosis, right? It's a little bit like learning to wear a sari. You see your mother wearing it every day, and you learn how to wear the sari. So it's a little bit like that. And it's hard to understand because it is a very deep philosophy, and the practice of Hinduism is ritualistic. But there are different ways of practicing. The Hinduism is a different game. Buddhism is also, very deep. It's a very deep kind of study emerging from Hinduism. And so, what I'm saying is that everybody needs to respect the bigger power, and it becomes particularly acute when you have a difficult um, time making a livelihood. And so, we have to see where the West takes this, whether they understand that being God fearing uh, is okay.
I don't know, ma'am. If anything we dirty brown people do is okay for them, but that's just a lighter vein. And I actually say that to my US friends, and they're like, yeah, well, uh, one actually told me recently, he said, I wish I was born in that side of the world. At least I have a future. I don't know what's going to happen to this country. So it's,
Well, it's in turmoil, and
yeah.
hopefully, I think the old uh, saying, everyone said, "Oh, the U.S. is so dynamic that it'll just reinvent itself." I think that time has come to an end because they haven't. When you reinvent yourself, you have to keep investing, and they have not kept investing in the system and the communities. They have invested in political ideology that is not giving the kind of returns that it used to give.
Hmm.
And the ideology is also so old; it's left over from the Second World War. That has to be, it's like religion in that sense. So it's become hard and immovable and immutable, and it has to be flexible in order for it to be attractive, etc. And so maybe they're still attracting the top talent in the world. They're still attracting very bright minds, but as the academic system becomes more, some of the universities in the United States are really NGOs. They're supposed to be NGOs, but they're profit-making machines disguised as NGOs. It's really unfortunate, um, because when that happens, then you have to start thinking about returns, right? And pre-thinking and innovation happens without those encumbrances. And so we hope that the US will be able to finance, and maybe under if Donald Trump comes back, maybe he will do what he always says he does, which is mind his own business. I hate the US mind its own business for a while, just look inward, correct itself, and then present itself to the world as a country that is again to be admired, because it has been for a very long time.
So when you see the current situation in US, and the last question would be, how should India look at its policy going forward? Because you're not going to get consistency for a while. You're not going to get a rational answer. You're not going to get a steady thought. You're not going to get cooperation, because as the desperation of the game goes forward, you will find them trying to take more tactical, radical decisions rather than long-term strategic, decisions which might look like a loss in the face of it, but in the long term will actually benefit the US. Which is what for them, their policymakers, India should be. Right? They might have to lose some technology to India, but in the long term, India will become a great big partner for the US if the things go the way they are. So how should we modify our game going forward?
So I think one of the big positioning a big positioning that India is trying to do is be the China, the plus one of the China plus one,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we've got a US that is deindustrializing or deindustrialized completely, that is trying to reindustrialize. India is trying to industrialize, right? We're just trying to expand our industrial base. We can, if we keep our policies right, we stop fiddling with taxes, and we become a very stable place for investment.
Mm-hmm.
We can be the China plus one, but also not the man. We don't have to be the manufacturing center of the world. We can be the manufacturing center for our own country because we've got a large market. We've got to start looking beyond the market. We can certainly be a big exporter in certain things, right? And the great advantage that we have over China is our software. Our software, so we can be the software hardware combined that works well for the rest of the world and for India. And we have to be a partnership. Luckily, we don't have to learn things the way China had to learn things, right? The Cultural Revolution really destroyed the middle class and the intelligentsia of China. So they needed to import a lot of the managers that came from the West. And so it really became this Western country that was doing manufacturing for the West. It's now having a hard time finding their own people to consume their own goods. But India already has very strong home markets. So we need to become a good export market. I think the IMEC corridor and INSTC are extremely important. I don't think India is going to be extreme. I think we'll do enough for ourselves, we do enough for the world. The most important thing is for India to be where it was, a very stable country in the middle of the East and the West. With the US, we have to understand, you're right, that because of the turmoil, it may not be as dependent a
Mm-hmm.
partner as we would like it to be, or has been to others in the past. But we should certainly keep tabs on them. We should be able to work with them because they do have talent, and much of our talent is there also. And so, sticking to our own interests and keeping that first without taking, as we say in Bombay, panga with the US, that is extremely important. We've been talking to China for almost 5 years. Right? They've been on our borders for almost 5 years, 2020, maybe more. We still have not gone to war. We're still working diplomatically. And Dr. Jaishankar has said for all those countries that want to intervene, we will sort it out amongst ourselves. I think that is the right attitude. A confident country sorts out its own problems. We don't need anybody else to do it
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we will be able to do the same thing with the US. We're doing it with Europe, with Japan, and that is the most important thing. We should also be able to cultivate relationships with America's neighborhood, right? So South America, Mexico, and Canada. I don't know how that's going to look, but if they have a change in government, maybe, but certainly Latin America. That is an area that we should have more engagement with. And so that also helps us to understand the US a little bit better.
Interesting perspective, ma'am. Thank you so much for the time. It's a pleasure talking to you, although the first interaction, and I hope that's not the last one. And we keep in touch, and we are able to, I am able to learn a little more from you. It's a pleasure talking to you, and hope to see you again. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you very much. Namaskar.